The UN chamber was unusually tense, not because of the usual power plays or veiled threats thrown across polished mahogany tables. This time, something deeper lingered in the air. A storm was brewing, and its eye sat calmly behind a nameplate that read, President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso. Across the hall, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu adjusted his tie without looking up. His intelligence briefings had warned him Traoré wasn't like the other African leaders who'd sat at this table. He didn't ask for aid. He didn't beg for trade deals. He came with accusations and, worse, intentions. For weeks, Traoré had made waves across Africa. His speeches cut through diplomatic niceties like a blade, targeting what he called neo-imperialist partnerships. And Israel had been named. Not directly, but the allegations were clear. Arms funneling into the Sahel, intelligence sharing with rogue militias, extraction deals that bypass sovereign governments. The African Union watched him with growing awe. The West watched him with growing concern. And Netanyahu? He watched him with cold calculation. This was supposed to be a development summit. Instead, it was a chessboard. And Traoré just moved his queen. He stood slowly. No script. No teleprompter. When we speak of peace, Traoré began, we must also speak of those who profit from war. When we ask for partnerships, we must question those who offer chains instead of hands. Netanyahu's jaw tightened. Cameras rolled silently. Africa will not be the battleground of your surveillance. Our children will not grow up dodging drones and dodging debt. We see what's happening in the Sahel. We know who supplies the weapons. We know who trains the shadows. The room froze. A murmur swept through the South American delegation. The French ambassador scribbled something and left the room. Traoré turned to Netanyahu directly. And to the state of Israel, if your friendship demands silence while our lands burn, then we will choose the fire over the leash. Africa stands up today, not against the Jewish people, but against the systems that see our lives as pieces on their global board. The thunderous silence was broken only by Netanyahu rising, slowly, carefully, with that practiced smile he wore when facing pressure, or prey. Mr. President, Netanyahu replied smoothly, Israel has always stood with Africa. We invest, we share, we protect. Traoré didn't flinch. You control. The room shifted. Something irreversible had begun. Outside the chamber, journalists scrambled to rewrite headlines. Inside, two men locked eyes, not as leaders of nations, but as avatars of two clashing futures. And Africa, for the first time in decades, wasn't just reacting to the global stage. It was rewriting the script. By the time the UN chamber emptied, the echo of Traoré's words still clung to the walls like smoke after a fire. Netanyahu hadn't responded with aggression. He didn't need to. His response would come from quieter corridors. Back in the Israeli delegation suite, behind biometric locks and soundproof walls, Yael Tzur, Mossad's liaison to international diplomatic security, waited for him. He's not just loud, she said without preamble. He's dangerous. Charisma with conviction. Lethal combination. Netanyahu sipped his water slowly, eyes fixed on a screen showing Traoré giving interviews in the lobby below. Western journalists were circling him like moths to flame. Every quote he dropped sparked hashtags, debates, viral loops. He wants a rupture, Netanyahu muttered. He wants Africa to believe that Israel is the puppet master behind every drone, every bullet, every coup. We do have assets in the Sahel, Yael reminded him. And partners. Netanyahu glanced up sharply. We had secrecy, that's what we had. He stood and walked to the window. Below, Traoré raised a defiant fist, surrounded by ambassadors from Mali, Niger, and Congo. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was a block forming. We need to fracture his base before it hardens, Netanyahu said, quietly, discreetly. Yael nodded. There's an opening. She pulled up a profile on her tablet. Colonel Issouf Dao, Traoré's second-in-command. Formerly trained in French military academies, pragmatic, ambitious, possibly impatient. He's not as loyal as he appears. We believe he disagrees with Traoré's confrontational style, thinks it endangers Burkina Faso. Netanyahu raised an eyebrow. You're proposing we turn him? I'm proposing we make him believe Traoré is walking Burkina Faso into isolation or war. A long silence. Do it, Netanyahu said at last. Start small, untraceable, and Yael? She looked up. If Traoré wants a confrontation, let's show him how quiet power moves. Meanwhile, across the city in a secured African Union suite, Traoré sat with a worn notebook in his hand. No staff, no cameras. Just a message freshly decoded by his intelligence team. They've activated something. One of your own might not be yours anymore. He leaned back, closed his eyes briefly, and exhaled. The game was on, but it would not be played on their terms. Colonel Issouf Dao stared at the encrypted message on his satellite phone for the third time. You believe in stability. He believes in chaos. When the time comes, make the right choice. YT, no signature, no logo. Just those chilling 3 letters, YT. He didn't need a cipher to know it came from the Israeli delegation, likely Mossad, operating through intermediaries. Dao had served under Traoré since the revolution. He admired the man's courage, but lately, the rhetoric had escalated. Every speech pulled Burkina Faso further from its cautious allies. Every bold declaration burned a bridge. And now he was confronting Israel? Publicly? Dao wasn't a coward, but he was a strategist. And this felt like a war they weren't prepared to fight. Across the corridor, Traoré poured tea with calm precision, but his thoughts spun fast and sharp. They'll go for the spine, he muttered to himself, not the skin. He knew how these intelligence networks operated. The Mossad didn't bomb first, they turned people. Quietly, surgically. And if he was right, Dao, the man closest to his military command structure, was now in their sights. We must stay unpredictable, Traoré said later in a closed-door meeting with his inner circle. If we act like we suspect, they'll speed up the play. If we act naive, they'll overreach. One advisor, a fierce-eyed woman named Aminta, leaned forward. So what do? We bait them, Traoré said. Let them think they've won, and when they show their hand, we cut it off. The next morning, international headlines exploded. Burkina Faso's military shows fractures as Colonel Dao skips. Strategic meeting. Sources suggest rift between Traoré and top brass. Is Israel secretly influencing African politics? None of it was confirmed. All of it was intentional. Traoré had leaked the story himself. In Tel Aviv, Yael Tzur read the headlines and allowed herself a small smile. He took the bait, she said to Netanyahu. Good. Now, let's make it real. Back in Ouagadougou, Dao stared at his phone again. This time, the message was clearer. We can protect you, but only if you help protect your country from him. He deleted it, but the seed was already planted, and Israel knew. Seeds don't stay buried forever. Midnight draped over Ouagadougou like a heavy curtain, but the presidential palace was far from asleep. Inside the dimly lit strategy room, President Traoré sat alone at a long oak table, a flickering lamp illuminating classified files sprawled before him. Every report circled back to one man, Colonel Issouf Dao, the second-in-command, the disciplined officer, and possibly the weak link. Aminta entered without a word, carrying a USB stick and a face carved with worry. We intercepted more traffic, she said. Encrypted transmissions from Tel Aviv. Same signal hitting Dao's phone. Mossad is testing him. Traoré didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed on a printed transcript showing Dao's recent absences, missed briefings, and delayed responses. This isn't a full breach, he said calmly. It's a trap, for both of us. They want us to think we've already lost him. They want panic. Then why not detain him? Aminta asked. He finally looked up. Because if he hasn't broken, we can turn this against them. At that same hour, Dao sat alone in a safe house outside the capital. His phone blinked softly with one final message. Report the presidential convoy's route. No violence unless necessary. Do this and your country avoids the storm. Dao stared at the screen. He could feel the weight of betrayal pressing down like a loaded weapon in his hand, and then he stood gay and pulled out a small recording device from his briefcase. For the last week, he hadn't just been listening, he had been recording. Every message, every veiled threat, every attempt to compromise him. By dawn, he entered the palace unannounced. Guards shifted uncomfortably but let him through. Traoré was already waiting. The air was still. Dao placed the device on the table. Pressed play. Israeli accented voices filled the room. Threats, promises, pressure. When the audio stopped, there was silence. Dao finally spoke. I served this country before Traoré. I'll serve it long after. But I will not serve foreign hands. Traoré nodded slowly. Then you're no longer under suspicion. You're our blade now. The two men locked eyes. For the first time since the summit, Traoré knew Israel's quiet war just lost its first battlefield. Aboard a private jet above the Mediterranean, Yael Tzur reviewed the latest intel feed with a clenched jaw. Mossad's playbook rarely failed, especially not with a target as politically isolated as Burkina Faso. But now, something was off. Colonel Dao had gone dark. No data, no signal pings. He'd either flipped or vanished. Either way, their carefully designed narrative that Traoré's regime was cracking from within was collapsing. Netanyahu appeared on the screen from Jerusalem. We have to recalibrate. What's the damage? Yael hesitated, then said it plainly. Traoré played us. He fed the international press just enough smoke to suggest internal collapse. Meanwhile, he was solidifying his control. Netanyahu's face hardened. Then it's time for something less subtle. Quietly, of course. Yael already had the next phase queued up. There's a French logistics firm operating in Niger. It's been laundering Israeli tech into the Sahel. If it accidentally leaks, the narrative flips. Israel looks like the aggressor, yes, but Traoré looks reckless. We can use it to isolate him diplomatically. Netanyahu's voice dropped lower. No direct link to us. I want clean hands, always. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood at the edge of a secret bunker. Projected onto the wall was a map of Israeli-linked installations across Africa, ports, surveillance hubs, arms routes, economic outposts hidden behind fake development aid. Dao stood beside him, stone-faced. This isn't just about Burkina Faso, Traoré said. It's a web, a quiet occupation dressed as partnership. Then what's the move? Traoré tapped a red dot glowing over Niger. We leak the leak before they do. Show the world that Israel was setting us up for chaos, not peace. Aminta entered the room, holding a flash drive. We've already drafted the report, full timeline, contracts, financial routes, anonymous tip to Al Jazeera in 6 hours. Traoré nodded. Let the world see the game before they even know they were playing it. The leak sent shockwaves across the diplomatic world. African nations that had remained cautiously neutral were now sending quiet messages of solidarity to Ouagadougou. From Kinshasa to Dar es Salaam, Traoré's words were echoing in government chambers. Africa is not a market. It is not a laboratory. It is not a battleground. It is a continent, and it is awakening. In Addis Ababa, the African Union convened an emergency session. Traoré wasn't invited, but his influence was undeniable. Behind closed doors, ministers debated whether to publicly support Burkina Faso or keep their hands clean. Only one nation didn't hesitate: Mali. Colonel Assimi Goïta sent a direct message to Traoré. We stand with you, not behind you. Soon after, Niger followed. Then came the unexpected. Algeria, a nation long wary of southern entanglements, offered to broker a new Pan-African Intelligence Coordination Center, headquartered in Ouagadougou. Their proposal? Share surveillance data, track foreign interference, and build a united continental front. Traoré studied the offer in silence. Then he looked up at Aminta and Dow. This isn't a win, it's a signal. We're now on a path they will try to destroy. Dow folded his arms. Let them try. At least now we know who stands with us. But even as unity formed on the surface, the undercurrent of danger deepened. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu met with senior security officials. The dossier on Traoré now had its own cabinet folder. Non-aligned threats, level red. He's becoming a symbol, Yael Tsur warned. Not just for Burkina Faso, for the entire continent. If this alliance forms, it won't just weaken our influence. It will invite others, Iran, Russia, China. Netanyahu paced the room slowly. Symbols can be destroyed, quietly, efficiently. A new name was dropped on the table, Operation Silence Echo, a strategy of coordinated disinformation, digital sabotage, and, if necessary, kinetic disruption. What's the risk? One general asked. Netanyahu didn't answer right away. The real question, he said finally, is what happens if we do nothing? Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré stepped onto a balcony overlooking the capital. Crowds had begun to gather with candles, chanting his name, waving both flags and fists. He turned to Dow. This movement isn't mine anymore. It belongs to something greater now. Dow nodded. Then let's make sure it survives you. The attack came without warning, not with bombs, but with silence. Internet across Ouagadougou slowed to a crawl. Bank networks froze. Government email servers blinked out. Cell towers went dark block by block like falling dominoes. For the people of Burkina Faso, it felt like a glitch. For Traoré, it was war. Aminta rushed into the crisis room. It's a coordinated digital offensive. Malware injected into our telecom backbone, traced to IPs bouncing between Tel Aviv, Geneva, and Kigali. They're testing our nerves, Traoré said, trying to break public confidence before they break infrastructure. Colonel Dow entered next, flanked by a young cybersecurity analyst barely out of university. We've isolated the infection point, the analyst said. They used a false software update to piggyback in. Dow cut in. It gets worse. There's fake news flooding local social channels, stories saying you fled the capital, that you're negotiating asylum in Qatar. Traoré allowed himself a grim smile. So they've moved to psychological warfare. Meanwhile, in a private bunker in Israel, Yael Tsur watched the digital chaos unfold. Phase 1 complete, her technician said. The capital's firewalls are collapsing. But Yael frowned. Something didn't feel right. What's their response time? Too fast, the tech said. They were expecting this. And they were. Because 3 days earlier, Aminta had secretly flown to Nairobi, meeting with African cybersecurity specialists funded quietly by Algeria and South Africa. They had anticipated the attack and built a digital decoy. Within hours, the Burkina Faso government released a chilling counterstrike. A live stream aired globally. Traoré sitting calmly in front of a screen showing the attempted breach map in real time. You tried to drown us in silence, he said, but we speak louder now. He didn't stop there. Alongside the broadcast, Burkina Faso published evidence, server trails, malware signatures, metadata, all pointing to Israeli-linked contractors operating under diplomatic cover. The reaction was explosive. Burkina Faso accuses Israel of cyber warfare. Digital colonialism. Africa pushes back. Traoré goes global with proof of interference. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu stared at the footage in cold silence. We underestimated him, Yael admitted. Netanyahu replied quietly, No, we provoked him, and now the fire is out of our hands. In global politics, bullets mattered less than beliefs. And now the narrative war had gone nuclear. Major Western outlets, CNN, BBC, Le Monde, cautiously reported on the accusations of Israeli cyber operations in Africa. But in the global south, the reaction was electric. Al Jazeera aired round-the-clock coverage of Traoré's speech. Pan-African influencers reposted it with hashtags like digital colonialism and Africa stands up. Even TikTok was ablaze. Young Africans remixing Traoré's words with protest beats, rapping over fire graphics. They came through code. Now we fight with truth. In Washington, the White House press secretary stumbled through a briefing when asked if the U.S. supported the Israeli operation. Her answer, carefully vague. We support regional stability and encourage diplomatic dialogue among all partners. Translation: we're watching this unfold, but we're not taking sides yet. In the heart of Ouagadougou, a secret war room buzzed with heat and purpose. Traoré, Dow, and Aminta stood before a wall of international headlines, tweets, intercepted chatter. They're retreating from the digital front, Aminta said, but trying to spin the narrative, painting you as a populist radical destabilizing regional order. Traoré remained still. Then we give them a new image to fear. He turned to a map on the wall, marked with red pins. African cities, capitals, universities, cultural centers. We launch the Pan-African Resistance Forum, a conference of thinkers, leaders, and digital warriors, not just military, ideological, intellectual, cultural. Dow raised a brow. You want to fight their software with speeches? Traoré's voice didn't rise. Speeches built empires, and now they'll help us unbuild one. Elsewhere, in Jerusalem, Netanyahu faced his cabinet with a sharp glare. He's not a general, he's a movement, he said. And movements are harder to kill. A senior advisor leaned in. Then we stop treating him like a threat to Israel and start treating him like a threat to the system. Netanyahu nodded. Activate every partner, every media channel, every lever of global influence. The order was simple: discredit, disorient, dismantle. But Traoré was already ahead, because the next morning, millions around the world woke up to an alert. Coming soon, the first Pan-African Resistance Forum, Live from Ouagadougou, and beneath the title, Africa Will Speak for Itself. The launch of the Pan-African Resistance Forum sent tremors through foreign ministries across Europe and North America. Embassies in West Africa reported unprecedented youth mobilization, mass university sign-ups for live streams, and spontaneous street rallies held under the banner, Africa Will Speak for Itself. But not everyone was cheering. In Paris, London, and Tel Aviv, urgent cables flew through encrypted lines. What began as a cyber dispute had now become an ideological rebellion, with Traoré as the symbol. In a closed-door NATO briefing, a U.S. diplomat asked flatly, "What happens if this catches on? If the Sahel turns into the next Latin America of the 1960s? No one had a clean answer. Back in Ouagadougou, preparations for the Resistance Forum were underway. Screens were being installed across the capital. Delegations from Mali, Algeria, and Congo were en route. Even observers from Latin America and Southeast Asia had quietly RSVP'd. Colonel Dow surveyed the stage construction, where workers were hanging massive banners with a single phrase in bold black letters, "Not allies." Equals Aminta approached, her phone buzzing non-stop. Israeli diplomats are trying to contact us through intermediaries. They say they want to de-escalate, reframe the relationship. Traoré barely reacted. That means they're afraid. He paced slowly through the nearly finished auditorium. They think if they soften their tone, we'll soften our memory. Should we meet with them? Dow asked. Traoré stopped. Number let them speak through headlines. We'll speak through history. In Tel Aviv, Yael Tsur watched the Resistance Forum promo play across African digital networks. They're not just fighting us anymore, she said. They're creating something bigger, something that can't be sanctioned or bombed. Netanyahu stared out the window, his reflection flickering across the glass. Then we have one last option. He turned. Cut the head off the movement. Yael's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting Traoré doesn't get to leave that forum alive. But across the continent, something else was growing, faster than any bullet could reach. A belief, a fire, a movement, and even the most powerful states were beginning to realize it's harder to kill an idea than a man. The day of the Pan-African Resistance Forum arrived under a sky heavy with tension. Thousands gathered outside the National Conference Center in Ouagadougou. Flags waved, drums echoed, and chants rose like thunder. Africa, not divided, not controlled, not afraid. Inside, security was tight. Every badge verified 3 times, every hallway patrolled. Traoré's inner circle was on edge, and for good reason. Intelligence had confirmed it. A foreign-backed assassination plot was in motion. But Traoré refused to cancel. They want us to flinch. We stand taller, he said simply. Colonel Dow wore full military dress, but under his coat was a suppressed sidearm, untraceable. Aminta had positioned counter-surveillance teams at all entry points. Snipers were placed on rooftops, not for display, for defense. The opening session began. Delegates from 20 African nations stood and applauded as Traoré walked on stage. He didn't smile. He stood in silence until the room stilled. Then, with no script, no teleprompter, he began. We are told to choose between chaos and control, between instability and dependency. That sovereignty is a luxury Africa cannot afford. But I say this, if freedom brings friction, then let it burn. The crowd erupted. You come here not to witness a rebellion. You are the rebellion, not against nations, not against faiths, but against a system that says Africa must kneel to be accepted. He paused. We refuse. From this day forward, we don't ask. We declare. The applause was deafening. But outside, a black van crept through an alley near the venue. Inside, 3 men, one with a suppressed rifle, another with a foreign accent, the third on comms with a handler in Tel Aviv. Target in sight. But as the man stepped out, Colonel Dow was already there, waiting. One silent shot. One body dropped. The others were captured before they could breathe. Hours later, as news of the foiled attack spread, Traoré remained calm. They tried to erase a voice, he told the press. Instead, they amplified it. The forum ended with a declaration signed by 12 African nations, a pledge to establish a sovereign continental digital alliance free from foreign control, independent, united. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu read the report in silence. We missed, Yael said. He didn't respond, because he knew, deep down, they hadn't just missed a man. They had missed a moment, a turning point. In the streets of Ouagadougou, a mural was painted that same night. It showed Traoré standing barefoot on scorched earth, holding a burning chain, not broken, but melted. Beneath it, 3 words, Africa stands up. In a world where empires operate not only with armies but with algorithms, cables, and covert deals, one voice can still ripple across continents. Ibrahim Traoré did not simply confront a nation, he challenged a system that profits from silence, thrives on dependency, and fears awakening. This was not just a clash between Burkina Faso and Israel. It was Africa standing before history and saying, we are no longer your resource, we are your equal. They tried to fracture his circle, they tried to distort his message, they even tried to erase him, but instead they built a symbol, because sometimes, in trying to kill a fire, you only spread the flames. This story was never about one man. It was about millions who saw their reflection in his defiance, and who, for the first time in generations, stood up and said, we won't kneel, not now, Not ever again.